Welcome to this episode of Your Wellness MD podcast. Family physician and wellness expert, Dr. Daniela Steyn, has meaningful conversations that will take your health to the next level. She explores the connection between a healthy body, mind, and soul, and shares tips that will enable you to thrive. Dr. Steyn has helped thousands of people have a better quality of life by improving their health with science-based knowledge, education, better nutrition, mindfulness, and lifestyle choices. Join us today, empowering you to live your best life with optimal health.
Hi from me, Dr. Daniela Steyn. I am so excited to have Gina with me as a guest today. Gina Alfieri is a certified nutritional practitioner. She's a wellness business owner, a wife, a mom of 4 children. Gina is passionate about helping people to get to the root of their illness by focusing on the whole person using whole foods, a healthy lifestyle approach, and supplementation. She's a fitness enthusiast, a bookworm, and an active member in her community. Gina, thank you so much for joining us today.
I am so excited to be here, Daniela. Thank you for having me.
So, Gina, you're a nutritionist. Will you tell our podcast listeners what is a nutritionist?
Sure. I have a background in nursing, and I worked in the medical field for a number of years, running a busy clinic. And then I went back to school, IHN, for those of you who might be local, to become a holistic nutritionist. And so what a holistic nutritionist is they see the value of really helping people get to the root of the problem and just support them through whole food, through nutritional supplementation, and some lifestyle recommendations. So really we look at the mind, spirit, the body connection, looking at the whole person rather than maybe just a list of symptoms or a condition.
So as a family physician, I always have had patients complaining of stress, always. But now that I started my wellness clinic, I've been overwhelmed with the amount of clients saying that they're stressed out, that they have burnout, that they're seeking help. Will you chat to us about this a bit? What is stress? Why does stress cause burnout?
Yeah, that is such a good point. Every single client that I have seen has said that they are stressed to some level, right? And we can all identify with that, because really stress, by its definition, is any type of change that can cause physical, emotional, or even psychological strain. So basically, stress it's your body's response to anything that requires attention or action. So we've all felt stress at some point. Look at our state of the world over the last couple of years. Think about how many plates we all have spinning in the air, whether it's your job stress, or maybe you're a business owner, maybe it's relationships, even great relationships. There are stressors there. Parenting can be stressful and joyful all at the same time. Our health, maybe finances. So none of us are immune to stress. So by its very own definition, we're all going to experience it at various times in our life, even daily. But what's important to know is to really how to help equip people with how to look at stress, how to react to stress, and maybe give them some tools and implement techniques to help alleviate those stressors before it moves to things like adrenal fatigue or digestion issues, or so many other problems that can really show up in our body due to unmitigated stress.
And I want you to stop here a little bit, because, how does stress show up in our bodies? To me, I myself have dealt with burnout at 3 different periods in my life. And then afterwards, when I look back, I can see, obviously I was stressed and burned out. I experienced A, B, and C. But, at the time, I didn't realize that these symptoms that I'm having are symptoms of stress. So will you expand a little bit on that to our listeners, and how does stress show up in our bodies?
Yeah, that's a great question, because so many things that show up as stress in our bodies, we can kind of explain away, or we just, pick up and keep going because that's what we think we ought to do. But sometimes if we slow down and we really take that step back and we listen to the clues that our body gives us, we can see how stress could show up in a number of different ways. So one thing is digestive disorders. And this is like my jam. This is what I love because I really see how gut health is so so key in so much of our other health. And so digestive disorders, like maybe low stomach acid, so you start to not digest your foods very well. Sometimes things like elimination slows down so we can get constipated, or it speeds up in time of stress, so you end up with diarrhea. And it will also alter your gut flora. If you have things like dysbiosis happening, where it's the imbalance of the good bacteria and bad bacteria are out of balance in your digestion, so you're not digesting things well. A second way that we often see stress show up in your body, of course, is muscle tension. So things like stress headaches, you kind of get that typical, absolutely, in your neck, your head, your shoulders come up to your ears. But we also see things like jaw pain because people really clench their teeth. Sometimes they grind their teeth. You might find that you've got body aches because you're literally having muscle tension all throughout your body. A third way is we see decreased immune function. So when
That's
you are
a big one for me.
Yes.
When I'm stressed out and I don't sleep enough, I'll so easily get a sore throat, and start becoming sinusy, and that's a red flag sign for me. Especially when I'm overtraining, I would start feeling a cold coming on, and then I'll know, okay, this is my sign that I'm overtraining.
That's right. And it's so great for you to be aware of that, because it's an indicator to say, okay, maybe I need to slow down. Maybe I need to do gentle movement. How can I support? Maybe I can rest more. I can sleep more. I can start to look at some nutrition to support my stress, and really to be able to support your body. We also see stress can really create an imbalance for hormones. So it creates things like insulin resistance. So oftentimes you'll find out when you're stressed, you will crave things that are not necessarily the best kinds of foods for you. And then we see weight gain coming from that as well, and mood swings. And that's all kind of connected with those stressors. So what we want to do is be able to really help people, give them techniques to mitigate those stress symptoms.
Yes, and I found that with many of my patients that the stress response itself throw their hormones off. And then because their hormones are all thrown off, that would cause weight gain on its own with a slower metabolism. Because your body is now in the stress mode, it slows your metabolism in such a way that people gain weight without eating more. Then they get stressed out about gaining weight, and they go on a restrictive diet to stop the weight gain, which actually worsens the cycle because now they're not getting those nutrients their body needs to heal. So weight gain and then a restrictive diet is the worst thing that you can do for burnout. You really have to then up your nutrition and not junk food, but healthy foods that can help you heal. So that's a big one. And you're an incredible person to help clients, Gina, because you have this medical background for studying as a nurse, but now you're a business owner, you're mom of 4 kids, and you have worked through stress and burnout for yourself, so you're so equipped to help people. Tell me a bit about what you've been through.
Yes. Well, and this is the thing, none of us are immune to it. And it's why I'm passionate about sharing how stress is part of our everyday life. And I think that when I learned to look at stress differently, and then to be able to maybe help other people employ some of these techniques that I'll talk about, and how to, this is real life for me. I'm spinning many plates. It's a joy and a privilege to be involved with so many things, but that does mean that I need to be intentional about my time to ensure that I don't burn out. And really, like Daniela talked about, how she can recognize some of those symptoms rising up within her to maybe trigger the fact that maybe I need to take a rest in a certain area. And I always like to tell people we cannot give from an empty cup. So it's really important for me personally, as a mom of four, as a business owner, as somebody who's really active in my community, to make sure that I spend some time really mapping out what my week looks like. And I can get anxious when I think about all of the things, all the plates, the to-do list. I'm a list maker. So the to-do list is a mile long, and those things, if they continue bouncing around my head instead of maybe putting them on paper, it just creates like an anxiety, and stress goes through the roof. So a couple of things that I do every week is on Sunday nights, I actually write out what my week is going to look like. I map it out, and I intentionally write things in, like my spiritual time, my relationship time. I map out my work schedule, my exercise, and I also balance it out with good nutrition. So meal planning has become a thing for me to make life work. But I also know that, if you're not eating well, your body feels that, right? And so I start each morning with exercise. And so maybe your listeners are like, okay, this is a no-go for me. But exercise, it boosts your mood and it increases your energy. And this is my space where I get some alone time. And then I usually follow that up with a short time of personal growth. So whether it's devotions or maybe it's meditation or prayer time or even gratitude journaling, listening to a great podcast, those two things in the morning, those are my non-negotiables, because when I do those things, I start from a place of gratitude. I start from a place of abundance, and then I feel like I can go out and tackle a day well. And then I go about the rest of my day. So day to day looks slightly different, but these things are really key in starting off our days well.
And a couple of things you mentioned now, you actually share on your Instagram. I love following you, and I'll put a link in the description below for your Instagram, where you share meals that you make yourself. And as a busy mom, you don't have these ridiculous meals fancy chef meals that will take hours, but you're very cognizant of how to cook on a budget, but cook very healthy and cook in a fast way. And I love the recipes you share. I often save them on my Instagram. And then something else you share, which I really appreciate, is the exercises you do. And that's something you shared with me before, is that I love running. I'm an endurance athlete. But I realized at times when I have been burnt out, then that is not the time to be doing endurance exercise, because at that time, exercise like that can burn your body down even more. And I have a whole thing on specifically burnout, which I will share with our podcast listeners as well. But it's a course that I developed on how to help people to recover from burnout. So if you don't have access to see me as a patient, you can work through this course on your own. And on there, I go more in depth about the different types of exercise that's good for your body. Because I teach everyone to exercise. It's, as you said, it's critical to get in the right mind space to exercise every day. But, and that's something that you said, that when you are going through a tough stage, you can't go for a run because that is too hard on your body. And that is I think, quite critical to distinguish for yourself. And in that burnout course, it has a whole module on exercise that our listeners can go through. But to determine for your individual needs, what does your body need during burnout? Do you need to go for a walk, or do you need to do some strength training in your basement? Do you need to walk between trees? Do you need to do breathing exercises, yoga? What is your individual needs for exercise?
And I love that. I love that you've created a program that really shares with people. It's not this one size fits all. And I think that that's the holistic bend is really just sharing with people what is unique for you. We talk about bio-individuality, and that just means that, a running might be amazing for you. But during COVID, truthfully, these last 2 years, and I love to run too, like Daniela, but most of the time, I spent the first year of COVID doing Pilates because I really needed the gentle movement. I needed to be able to, lengthen and lean. And so it is about figuring out what your body needs at the time that it needs it. And, these things might seem very disciplined, all the things that I mentioned, but I didn't necessarily start off that way. And so if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, that's great, they run, they do this, they do that, or, life is really, looks super organized in her life, it's discipline is learned. And I just want to encourage the listeners to start with one thing per day that really just helps you become the best version of yourself. So maybe it is body movement, maybe it's personal growth, maybe it's meal planning and really figuring out what works for your family. Last night, it was a sheet pan meal that fed everybody, or just jotting down your schedule for the week so that the week doesn't feel like it's taking off without you coming with it. It's just sometimes, you can just employ one of these things. And one of the great books I read through COVID is called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he talks about habit stacking.
That's a great
book. Such a great resource. Yes. And it's, if you've not read it, I highly recommend you going and grabbing it. And, habit stacking can actually help lower our stress because we're employing some structure that helps give freedom within our day.
And hooking on to that, what you're saying about this chronic stress, the way I see it as a doctor, when someone has come to me after they've had too much stress for too long period of time, is that they can develop adrenal fatigue. So will you delve a little bit into that and explain to our listeners, what is your HPA axis, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis? What is that, and how does it manage your stress response?
Yeah, I love talking about this, and I literally speak to every single client because I think it's really helpful and empowering for people to understand that there are three main pathways in the body. And so hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal is one, and I'm going to dive deeper into that in a second. But then there's also hypothalamus, pituitary, and gonads, which are your sex organs, and then hypothalamus, pituitary, and thyroid. And so I always like to share with people, it's almost like a three-legged stool. And if your adrenals are totally getting knocked out, then the stool falls. And so what ends up happening is you have all of this imbalance, hormonal imbalance happening within the body. And so maybe I'll start with what adrenal glands are, where they're located, what they do, so that you can understand once you get adrenal fatigue, just how important that is in the body. So your adrenal glands are these little dome-like organs that sit just right on top of the kidneys, and they produce hormones that are really important to help you with things like metabolism. They help you regulate your immune system, blood pressure, and they also help with your response to stress and then many other functions. So as Daniela talked about, short-term stress is not the problem. Like when you're running away from a bear, or that's the example we give often, or even things like an accident. It's like in the moment, your focus is, you're hyper-focused. Things like your heart rate will increase, your blood will pump, adrenaline surges, because it's all about survival in those moments. And so things like digestion, your body isn't working on those things right now because it's all about survival. It's fight or flight mode. And that's part of what's called the sympathetic nervous system. And that really is meant to be for a short period of time. The problem is we are an overstressed, overworked, underslept, underexercised society. And really that employs more chronic stress symptoms, and that it wrecks our body. So our goal then is to really elicit the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of the sympathetic, where we help to really rest and digest. So again, we're all going to have stress in our lives, but what's key is helping our body to come back into balance with our parasympathetic nervous system, and really teaching our body to rest and digest.
And that is a big thing. So I teach my clients meditation, things like that too. And that's where exercise comes in for your parasympathetic system, but then also to explain why do you need that rest and digest? What is your gut-brain axis? Will you delve a little bit into that?
Yes, I love talking about this as well because the gut and the brain are so connected. And we hear things like, oh, it's a gut feeling. Well, that's really an interesting statement that comes from a physiological core. And so the gut-brain axis, we call the gut a second brain for a reason. So the gut-brain axis is really a two-directional communication between the central and the enteric nervous system. So it really links things together like emotions and the cognitive centers of the brain to the intestines. And so we have something called the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is in the midbrain, and it is a direct connection to your gut. So it's almost like a pathway, a highway, if you will. And so it's connected to your gut, and it modulates this whole gut-brain axis. So it feeds your gut, which affects your gut microbiome. It's really an important axis to connect.
And then for our listeners who may be not familiar with the word microbiome, what does that stand for? What does it mean? Microbiome?
So your microbiome is what the microbes are in your gut. So you have good bacteria and you have bad bacteria that are in your gut, or beneficial bacteria and bad bacteria. And you need a balance of both in your gut. And so if your gut microbiome is off, if you have more harmful bacteria than good, then it affects that connection.
And the good bacteria actually create some of our feel happy hormones, right?
Exactly. So when stress is elevated, what we find is serotonin, that feel-good hormone, actually goes down. And so about 90% of our serotonin, that feel-good hormone, is actually produced in our gut. So it's a key hormone that stabilizes your mood, that overall feeling of well-being and that happiness. So this hormone impacts your entire body. It enables your brain cells and just other nervous system cells to communicate with each other. So serotonin also helps with things like sleeping. It's a precursor for sleeping. So it's a precursor to melatonin. Many of us have heard of melatonin. So making sure we have enough serotonin is going to help us increase our sleep hygiene, our eating, and it will also help with digestion. So this is really key in immune regulation or immune dysregulation, making sure that this HPA axis stays healthy. It's necessary to keeping our immunity strong, because when we're stressed, and we kind of talked about it in the beginning, Daniela, but when we talk about stress, we see how stress can increase our appetite while simultaneously decreasing our energy. So we see how people can gain weight. We can see how people feel exhausted, and we call it, totally stressed, wired and tired, or we see them in complete adrenal fatigue where it's just difficult to perform the everyday tasks. But we also see things like it impacts our mood and our emotions because of the dip in the serotonin. We see that people actually respond poorly to more stress that comes their way. They become more irritable. And we also see things like cognitive function drop. And we see things like brain fog come, and our response to pain decreases as well. So all of these things are all in response to stress. So really making sure that we employ some techniques and how we look and mitigate those stress symptoms will be important for our health long term.
Yeah, that's critical, eh? And then there's so many things. It's not just about feeling better and feeling healthy. It is also those stress hormones impact our sex hormones, our reproductivity, there's all our hormones get impacted. Can you chat about our hormones and how that gets impacted?
Yes, absolutely. Hormones like insulin regulation. So when we're stressed, we often will feel like we want to grab foods that are comforting, and our cravings are spiked because what ends up happening is that our insulin sensitivity actually decreases. So we want more sugary foods that are not going to be great for our bodies and actually feed the stress response. But another thing I like to talk to people about, and there's a great diagram that I'll share with you, you can share with your listeners, is a pregnenolone seal. Yeah, it's such a great visual for people because most people don't know that cholesterol is literally like the backbone of many of our hormones, particularly our sex hormones. And so what happens is cholesterol gives way to pregnenolone, and that's kind of like a master hormone, and it can go into many different directions. And when it doesn't take its normal pathway, when we are stressed, it's then stolen over and goes to cortisol levels to help you increase your cortisol levels to deal with the stress in your life. So you'll find things like your cholesterol might increase as you are stressed because it's trying to overproduce cortisol to help you deal with your stress. But you're also seeing imbalances in things like the testosterone and your estrogen levels and aldosterone. And so we even see this happening with people who are so stressed about getting pregnant that they're actually having difficulty. So my advice is to try to, as much as possible, apply some of the techniques that we'll talk about in a few minutes to really help your body mitigate some of those stress symptoms. And so your body can then start bringing those hormones back into balance.
And that's also why we don't experience such a good libido when we're stressed out, because those precursors, instead of making the testosterone and estrogen that will increase your libido, all those precursors go to cortisol, just being stressed out, And so I think most of our listeners can relate that at periods when you're very stressed out, you don't have a libido.
Exactly. And
then getting back to stress. So if we want to cure everything, we want to be less stressed. And stress is very multifactorial. It's not just about quitting your job and sitting on a hilltop and meditate, right? It's a much bigger thing than just your environmental stress. So what else, apart from your job, what else creates stress in your body? And when we discussed exercise earlier on, where excessive endurance exercise can create stress in your body. But what else can create stress?
Great question. I also want to just hit the point that you covered is that most of the stress that we have in our life, it would be easy if we could just say, let's just cut out that stress. But that can't happen all the time, right? Like you just can't quit every job that brings you stress, and you just can't quit a relationship during a stressful time, or, so on and so forth. But there are other things that can contribute to stress, lifestyle factors, and we'll talk about that too. But things like dysbiosis or maybe leaky gut, and that might be new terms for you, but dysbiosis is that imbalance of good bacteria to bad bacteria in your gut microbiome. And that can be, usually it happens because of poor nutrition. So things like excessive alcohol, excessive caffeine, maybe highly processed foods, that can really contribute, like your standard American diet can really contribute to dysbiosis. And then dysbiosis left undone and just kind of allowed to take full course will then lead to something called leaky gut, where then your gut lining then becomes permeable. So what's impermeable and really meant to protect and keep nutrients in and absorption strong becomes permeable, and then we end up with all kinds of issues and inflammation in the body and all kinds of things. So then we see things like decreased serotonin, that feel-good hormone, and then a connection to your brain that just isn't optimal. And then something else that contributes to stress is poor sleep. So an individual that's really suffering from stress, we need to support the biochemistry of the body. So whether or not stress is harmful is really based on the strength of your system. So what I mean by that is the strength of your body, and a lot of contributing factors are in that. So most North Americans, we're not providing our bodies with the high quality nutrition that we need. So maybe instead of eating foods that are rich in vital nutrients, most of us are eating foods that really are focusing in on more refined foods that are high in calories, sugar, fat, and namely when we talk about fats, we're talking about saturated fats that might not be serving your body well.
So, and you mentioned so many things now rapidly. So if any of our listeners are interested in a specific topic and want to delve deeper, there are blogs on my website specifically regarding the leaky gut that you mentioned. There's a whole blog on that if you want to learn more about that. There's a blog on sleep if you want to learn more about that. There's a blog about nutrition. What you touched on is that these processed fats, these are the fats that they use in a factory to make certain foods, but fats that we use in our home, olive oil, walnuts, avocados, those are the healthy fats. Your concern are those processed fats, which are harmful to our health and our cholesterol. And then for all these things, there's blogs on my website. I'll put links below to look at that. If you can summarize that we've been chatting about practical tips for our listeners that are saying, yes, I know this is me that you're talking to. My body's burned out. I want to make choices how to be healthier, to feel like my old self again, to find joy in life, to enjoy life. I think to be happy and enjoy life. How do I get back to the old me? What practical advice would you give our listeners?
Yeah, such good. And here's the thing is that, the things that I'm going to be sharing are things that you can start right now and in your own home, very simply. And you don't have to do all of them. Sometimes it's just picking the one thing that resonates with you. Because what we want to do is strengthen our system, really, truly. And so maybe it's something as simple as just learning how to calm the mind and the body. Super important in helping you just be able to relieve stress symptoms. And the goal of these techniques is really just to produce that physiological response, that rest and digest that we talked about. So maybe for some, it's meditation. And, there's some great free apps that are out there. There's one that's called the Calm app. You can go through a guided meditation if you've never meditated before. And sometimes just starting off with just 2 minutes a day, it's all you need. Sometimes prayer does that for people. There's a reason why, traditionally speaking, through many cultures, you sit down and you pray before a meal. Mm-hmm. It's because you're supposed to pause and calm everything, get rid of all distractions. And really, it's allowing your body to be able to digest your food properly and get you in that right frame of mind rather than shoveling our food in really quickly. So both of those things are great.
You can, for our podcast listeners, can have a look at my YouTube channel, and there's links, specifically video on how to meditate. And please, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll really appreciate that.
That's amazing.
So that meditation helps to increase your vagal tone. How else can you improve your vagal tone?
Yeah, it's a great question. So stimulating that vagus nerve that we talked about, that highway from your brain right to your gut, when you stimulate your vagal nerve, you're actually employing that parasympathetic. So you are teaching your body how to slow down, how to relax, how to de-stress, which is going to just lead to those long-term improvements in your mood and your well-being. And so one thing you can do is hum. And I know this, whenever I mention this to people, they think, really? Does that, it works? So humming, and think about chanting, the monks, how they chant.
No, that's why.
So
that's
it
exactly
really helps.
why.
That's it. Exactly. Singing. And maybe you're not, Pavarotti, but you can sing in the shower and de-stress, or just turn it up in the car if you're driving. Cold exposure. Many people have heard of the Wim Hof method, where you're plunging into cold water, and there's lots of great evidence, science-based evidence on how that benefits. But how I do it is just the last minute or two of my shower, I just turn the water cold and I let the cold water come over me. And that just helps to, again, increase my vagal tone. And then even things like diaphragmatic breathing. So this is a huge one that I would highly recommend. It's helped me right before this podcast. Actually, I did it. And so just 4 beats in of breathing and pause for 1 beat and then exhale for 4. And you might just want to do it for 2 minutes. And it really trains us to be getting breath from our diaphragm rather than shallow breaths from our lungs. And even things like socializing and laughing. Think about what a good comedy will do for you when you are stressed out. That laughter or being with people, it just really helps us. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Definitely. I have a whole blog on laughter therapy. And also for these breathing exercises, there's a YouTube video. So you can have a look at my YouTube channel for breathing exercises. That will be a game changer. If you haven't implemented that, definitely breathing. What else?
And so here's where we can just talk about maybe some nutrition. So really eating a diet that's filled with colors, antioxidants are so huge. Whole foods will mean less inflammation, and inflammation just feeds that stress response. So I love coffee, but in times of immense stress, I do try to cycle my caffeine and I don't let it go out of whack because it really does feed that stress response. And then alcohol too. And so something that you may not realize is that alcohol will actually create more estrogen in our system, feeding hormone imbalance, feeding the stress response. And so we might want to limit it or avoid it during times of stress. And then things we've talked about exercise, but really so much evidence to support just 20 minutes of exercise a couple of days a week can really help to create an avenue for you to get the stress out, to deal with that, to boost your serotonin, that feel-good hormone. Or if you're really highly stressed, maybe you want to avoid those endurance trainings and maybe do something like a nature walk or some yoga, because it allows you to get into that deep breath. Yeah. And then things like sleeping. And I know I can be guilty of this, but sleeping 7 to 9 hours, really trying to dial down devices an hour or two before you go to bed, maybe get some light yoga, light stretching in, and going to bed roughly the same time every night and waking up roughly the same time every morning will actually help your circadian rhythm. And that alone will help you deal with the stress that comes day to day. But there are important hormones. If you're not sleeping, things like ghrelin and leptin are hormones that are regulated by sleep. So poor sleep will increase your hormone that feeds your hunger and then has been linked to all kinds of weight gain. And then leptin is a hormone which really signals satiety in your brain. So when you're stressed and then you add the fact that you're not sleeping, the whole idea of knowing when to stop eating and your brain signaling to you when you've satisfied and feeling full, that goes to sleep. And so you end up eating more even. So it's really important.
Yeah,
there's a couple of
big thing. Yes. Yes. So sleep is a very big thing. I actually, in my burnout course, I have a whole module on sleep because it's not just the hours that you sleep, but then also your quality of sleep. And you explained why the quality of sleep is so important. It is really because of that whole hormonal response. So I would encourage our listeners who want to delve deeper to look at my burnout course and specifically at the sleep module to improve your quality of sleep. And then there are some supplements that's helpful as well.
Yeah, so we really speak to, B vitamins are really important. So what happens is when you are stressed, your B vitamins become depleted from your body. So particularly B5, but I like to share with people a B complex. An active B complex is really great. It will help give you energy. It'll help give you, help you mitigate those stress symptoms. And then another thing that I share with people is maybe find foods that are rich in magnesium, but magnesium supplements are also really helpful because when we talk about stress symptoms, one way we feel them is through muscle tension. We feel it through digestive disorders. So magnesium really helps your muscles relax. It's almost like a tranquilizer, calming for the mind. And then it will also help with bowel health and keeping you regular. And so I've often told my clients to be able to really benefit from that, maybe taking a 200 milligrams of magnesium right before bed, about 30 minutes before bed, can help them get a deeper sleep, a deeper quality of sleep, but also help with your muscles and help with digestion as well. There's some great herbs out there.
Yeah, I do that myself. Every night before bedtime. I take magnesium biglycinate, and that 200 milligrams that you spoke about is good for the magnesium biglycinate. There are so many other magnesiums. Equivalent in magnesium oxide would be like 800 milligrams, and there's magnesium citrate. But I find none of them are biologically active and absorbed as well as the magnesium biglycinate. And then, so if you take a lot of magnesium that's not very well absorbed, it has a bit of a laxative effect. So if you notice that your magnesium supplement, does have a laxative effect, maybe just look at the type you're using, and it's magnesium biglycinate that's really helpful. Another way that you can do is you can take a bath with magnesium salts. Epsom salts, and that relaxes your muscles, especially after a hard workout or before bedtime, to relax everything. What other types of herbs can people use?
I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because the bath is really amazing to help to relax as well. Yeah. And then I would say lastly, there's some adaptogenic herbs like rhodiola and ashwagandha and ethereal root even, or ginseng, that can be found in herbal supplements. And they just really help support your body, not only deal with stress, but also give the energy that you might need or the calming that you might need. And just depending on what kind of stress you're dealing with, whether you're wired or tired or in full adrenal fatigue, you can figure out what maybe combination you need of these things. So lots of different things to explore. And I love that you've done a whole course on burnout, because I think that most of us are feeling, especially after these last couple of years, are just really learning how to dial in to our bodies and coming out of a burnout state and really being able to want to just live a thriving life where we feel our best, where we can, just really tackle our day and do it well.
Thank you so much for spending time with me, Gina. Our listeners have gained so much today. I have gained so much from listening to you. I really appreciate your time. If one of our listeners wants to contact you, how can they contact you?
Right now, I'm redoing a website, but if you want to contact me through Instagram, you can go to gina.gala.alfieri. And so maybe I'll ask Daniela to link it here, but it's GINA. .gala, GALLA.alfieri. And I have a link there in my bio. Feel free to go ahead. Yeah, thank you. And thanks. It's been such a joy and a privilege to just be here with you. I adore you and all the work that you do and all the information you give to people to just help them be their best. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Gina. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode today by medical doctor Daniela Steyn. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter at www.wellnessmdhealth.com to stay up to date on educational resources that will take your quality of life to the next level. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your healthcare provider. Never disregard medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. Remember, you are created to thrive.